poppin' primates? It's me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show, y'all. And I hope y'all like animals that go ooh, 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 hee, 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 in the night, because it is time to book a trip to Skull Island with Tom Hiddleston and Brie Larson. Donkey Kong Country has never been so brutal, son, especially when you add a bit of that Vietnam War flavor. So let's stop monkeying about and just swing on into this thing, shall we? But hey, before we do, maybe take a second and use your favorite finger to hit that like and or subscribe button. Or maybe you could be a little extra naughty and use your least favorite finger to spice things up. Like, every single like goes a long way to supporting the Heavy Spoilers channel. But if you really want to add some spice to your life, maybe even consider becoming a member today. At just 99 cents a month, getting early access to top-notch movie breakdowns before anybody else has never been so damn affordable. Like, I bet you won't even notice that dang dollar is gone. But if you are not a baller like that, no worries, we're just glad you're here. Anyways, Kong Skull Island was directed by Jordan Vogt-Roberts and released on March 10th, 2017, and was the first King Kong movie since Peter Jackson's beloved 2005 King Kong, which meant that Kong Skull Island had some pretty dang big gorilla footprints to fill in, but that was a challenge that Jordan Vogt-Roberts and his team were more than willing to tackle with a 1970s flair. While Vogt-Roberts very much appreciated the original 1933 King Kong film, he wanted to introduce a completely new kind of Kong in his own unique way that nobody had really seen before, and Jordan Vogt-Roberts thought the best way to do this was by giving Kong Skull Island a 1973 setting, heavily wrapped within themes of the Vietnam War, a war that plays a significant role within the plot of this film, as Jordan Vogt-Roberts was heavily inspired by Francis Coppola's 1979 Vietnam War film Apocalypse Now. Like, Kong Skull Island is just straight up Apocalypse Now with a tall-ass Donkey Kong if you think about it, with Skull Island itself being a narrative parallel to the country of Vietnam. And it's a big reason why the director chose to actually film in Vietnam, with the majority of the cast being absolutely amazed as to how beautiful the country of Vietnam actually was. The IMAX poster for Kong Skull Island was actually a direct tribute to Apocalypse Now as well. But before Vogt-Roberts got involved with the film, the original script was actually set almost 60 years prior in the year 1917. But anyways, let us talk about the absolutely genius way this movie starts off by having a young Hank Marlowe falling downwards from the sky, because this opening perfectly encapsulates a major theme of this movie: the metaphorical dangers of flying too damn close to the sun, as originally detailed in the ancient Greek tragedy of Icarus. Colonel Packard actually references the tale of Icarus early on in the movie as his fleet of helicopters first approach Skull Island. For those of you who do not know, this ancient Greek tale is about a boy named Icarus who, along with his father, try to fly away from an island that they're trapped on by using wings made out of wax. But Icarus would ignore his father's warnings and fly too high and close to the sun, causing Icarus to plummet to the ground after his wax wings inevitably melted. By starting Kong Skull Island with this imagery of a young Hank Marlowe falling from a sunny sky, Vogt-Roberts establishes this movie's strong Icarus sun theme from the jump, as it very much proves to be central to the overall progression of the film, as Colonel Packard would prove to be the foolish Icarus of this story, with King Kong himself becoming the very sun that Packard desperately tries to reach, no matter how many men he may lose along the way. Because much like Icarus, Packard did not like being told not to do something, especially after the sting that came with the news that America was withdrawing from the Vietnam War. Packard's bald black ass could not stand that the United States was just running from the people that Packard was led to believe were the evil enemy. And that anger and shame Packard felt about losing the Vietnam War amplified exponentially as soon as Kong showed up to give Packard a whole new war to fight. Not only is this why Kong is framed within the burning sun when he makes his first appearance in the movie, but it's also why Kong Skull Island begins and ends with zoom-ins to golden yellow eyeballs that were very much designed to look like burning suns. I mean, the freaking logo for Packard's Sky Devils helicopter squadron also reflects Packard's obsession with chasing the sun, as we can see that it's just a giant griffin raising its winged arms to try and reach a sun. But actually, fun fact about this Sky Devils logo, director Jordan Vogt-Roberts revealed on Twitter a few years ago that this design was heavily inspired by the Hylian Triforce design from the Legend of Zelda series, which I thought was super dope, as the Triforce in Zelda is also heavily associated with the sun. Like, I could honestly do a whole breakdown series on the Legend of Zelda and its links to the sun, because I freaking love that franchise so damn much and appreciate Jordan's nerd levels greatly. Like, we need more nerds directing films, man. But anyways, not only is this sun theme central to this movie, but once you notice it, you'll also begin to understand why Kong marketing materials throughout all of his MonsterVerse movies are typically themed with yellow and orange. Because Kong's species was exiled from the Hollow Earth to Skull Island a long ass time ago, Kong species became more associated with the yellow-orange sun that powered the world of the humans more so than the mysterious blue Hollow Earth radioactive power source that powers titans like Godzilla. So if you look at the logo for the new Godzilla x Kong movie coming out, for example, you'll see that Godzilla is in blue and Kong is in orangey-yellow for this reason. I actually go into this a little during my breakdowns of the last few episodes of Legendary's Monarch Legacy of Monsters TV series, so definitely check those out if you love the MonsterVerse and haven't seen those already. But anyways, back to the opening, the young Marlowe that falls is actually played by actor Will Britton, with John C. Reilly's voice dubbed over. Will Britton would appear in the movie again as a completely different character in the form of Hank Marlowe's son. But if you look at Marlowe's jacket, you can see the words "Good for your health" written on the back. This is actually a pretty sweet double-layered Easter egg because it's a reference to Kaneda's jacket from the 1988 anime classic Akira that says the words "Good for your health, bad for your education" on the back, while also being a nod to John C. Reilly's character, Dr. Steve Brule, from the TV show Check It Out with Dr. Steve Brule, where his slogan is "For your health." And on the front side of Marlowe's jacket, you can see a patch with the words Lizard Company on it. Much like the director took inspiration with the Sky Devils logo, Vaught Roberts also designed Marlowe's Lizard Company patch after being inspired by Travis Bickle's King Kong Company patch from the movie Taxi Driver, as this Travis character fought in the Vietnam War with this fake company. But anyways, young Marlowe lands on Skull Island during a World War II dogfight gone wrong with his soon-to-be best friend, Gunpei Ikari, who at the time was fighting for the Japanese army. According to the director, Gunpei Ikari's name is a tribute to Shinji Ikari from the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion, as well as video game legend Gunpei Yokoi, who was instrumental for a number of Nintendo successes like, creating the Game & Watch system, designing the original Game Boy, and producing a number of classic Nintendo titles, with the original Donkey Kong being his first banger. So I feel like it was very fitting for this man to get a shout out in a Kong movie. Then after we get a zoom in on Marlowe's eye, that pupil turns into a sun as the Kong Skull Island title comes up. The opening credit sequence opens up with a July 20th, 1945 quote from President Truman that he said during the raising of the American flag at Berlin following Germany's surrender of World War II. Then we get images of Americans celebrating victory over Japan on August 15th, 1945, aka VJ Day, before getting this frame that says US unveils Earth satellite, as audio from President Eisenhower's October 1957 remarks about the US development of Earth satellites play. But if you look at this frame, notice how the top of it is blue while the bottom is orange, much like how the logo for the Landsat Satellite Monitoring Organization is modeled after these two blue and orange suns. Like I said before, this is the MonsterVerse's way of teasing the two separate realms of the blue irradiated Hollow Earth and the orange solar irradiated human Earth. Since Landsat stands for Land Satellite, having the Hollow Earth blue sun over the word land, and then having the orange sun under the word sat in satellite, was a perfect way to allude to both the subterranean and outer space cosmic energy sources, because the Hollow Earth is in the land and satellites are in space, like the sun. Then a little later, as John Ortiz's name appears on the screen, a message from President Harry Truman authorizing Monarch's Project Muto flashes in the background, a message which gave General Puckett the go-ahead to attempt the Castle Bravo nuclear bombing of Godzilla at Bikini Atoll. This letter made a brief appearance at the start of 2014's Godzilla movie, as it marked the very first time that the United States government decided to take massive unidentified terrestrial organisms, or MUTOs, like Godzilla and Kong seriously. Then, a little after this, we see a newspaper article that says, "Government denies missing third ship," with that article being a reference to the USS Lawton ship that Bill Randa was the only survivor of, something that Randa himself mentions while trying to acquire government assistance for his field trip to hell. We of course learn in Monarch Legacy of Monsters that the USS Lawton somehow found its way to the jungles of the Philippines after being attacked by a mysterious kaiju, likely the Ion Dragon found on the scene. Then after we see some footage of the Russian launch of the Sputnik 1, the first satellite in space, we soon see these images of various mutoskeletons from the CIA, with one of them possibly being the skull of one of Kong's species. Then after this, we get a quick flash of the Monarch logo with the X-ray of some type of snake or eel kaiju, followed by this drawing of a turtle muto. That could either be a reference to the magma turtles featured in the prequel comic Skull Island: The Birth of Kong, or could also be a slight nod to the competing monster property Gamera, who is basically just a big-ass turtle Godzilla knockoff, but whose character is still very much loved by the people of Japan today. Like the Japanese really love their kaiju, man. Then a little after this, we get flashes of a monkey carrying a baby up a tree branch, quickly followed by an image of an octopus camouflaging into their surroundings. Possible foreshadowing to when Kong himself is attacked by an octopus later on in the movie. A quote from Arthur C. Clarke about the future of mankind being dominated by machines instead of man or monkeys can be heard following this, very much foreshadowing Apex Cybernetics' secret plans of becoming the top apex predator on Earth with their Mechagodzilla program. Then John F. Kennedy's September 1962 speech about America's efforts to go to the moon play before we get a bunch of flashes of historical footage, including the Apollo 11 space launch to the moon, a 1960 civil rights march, the first walk on the moon, and war reels from the Vietnam War. We then get a quote from Robert Kennedy that mentions an old Greek saying about taming the savageness of man and making gentle with the life of this world, which is the perfect way to end this opening credits sequence, as it perfectly encapsulates the overall struggle of this movie, taming the savageness of war-hungry men like Packard to try to make gentle with the life of Skull Island. Then the opening itself finally ends by transitioning to the scene of a 1973 Vietnam War protest at Washington, D.C., where Bill Randa and Houston Brooks arrive at the Capitol to beg for funding for their Skull Island excursion. And judging by Randa and Brooks watching Nixon announce the end of the Vietnam War on TV when they arrive for their begging session, the date of their arrival looks to be January 23rd, 1973, to be exact. Then, after Senator Willis gets Randa his piggyback with Landsat and calls up Packard for the military escort, we head to Saigon and get a shot of a Life magazine's Year in Picture review for the year 1973, with a cover featuring Richard Nixon, a space satellite, the Vietnam War, and tennis player Billie Jean King. When Randa and Brooks enter the bar, the 1967 song White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane can be heard playing in the background. Then we finally meet Tom Hiddleston's James Conrad, with Hiddleston himself actually filming this movie back-to-back with Thor Ragnarok because your boy stay booked and busy. But speaking of Marvel actors, after this we meet Brie Larson's Mason Weaver as she gets a phone call giving her the go-ahead to attend Landsat's survey of Skull Island. The dude on the phone mentions that Weaver is so damn good at being a photographer that she'll soon have her photographs featured on the cover of Time magazine, which is quite the professional achievement. Then, as the Sky Devils get ready for launch, we get a look at the back of one of their helmets, which contain a winged skull of a demon, perfectly encapsulating the Sky Devil theme. And in direct reference to their company logo, Packard calls the Sky Devil's deployment the Griffin and Ant Show, with the very people that they're leaving behind on the boat disappearing and becoming like ants as they ascend into the storm. And like I mentioned before, as the Sky Devils navigate Skull Island's perpetual storm, Colonel Packard recites the tale of Icarus and brags about how the US government isn't an irresponsible father like he felt Icarus' dad was, which is quite ironic considering that Packard's irresponsible leadership is exactly what leads to him losing most of the Sky Devils, including himself. Like, Packard's prideful nature is exactly what led actor Samuel L. Jackson to rightfully compare his character to the reckless Captain Ahab of Moby Dick. Before they all enter the storm, Samuel L. Jackson tells everyone to hold on to their butts, which is a clear reference to the same line that he said in 1993's Jurassic Park. But after the group clears the storm, these devils of the sky drop their seismic bombs onto the unsuspecting populace of Skull Island, allowing Houston Brooks and Son Lin to discover that the earth under the island is completely hollow. The very first clue that would lead on to proving Brooks and Randa's hollow earth theories. But unfortunately for them, these deadly explosions trigger the arrival of Skull Island's greatest defender of life, Kong, who enters the movie by throwing a whole ass tree at one of these Sky Devil helicopters, leaving all of these men to die without knowing that a giant gorilla led them to an early grave. The very beginning of the very first episode of Monarch Legacy of Monsters throws it back to this chaotic moment in Kong Skull Island. As the Griffin-themed Sky Devils face off against Kong, fans of the original 1933 King Kong movie can definitely see how Kong Skull Island paid homage to the iconic scene of Kong fighting those airplanes at the top of the Empire State Building. But unfortunately for Packard and his Sky Devils, they all flew too damn close to the son of the Kong legacy. And as a result, this pissed off not gorilla clipped the wings off of the Griffin and sent all of those helicopters hurtling to the ground. And right when Kong cuts off Paranoid by Black Sabbath, we get this ultra cool shot of this helicopter spinning out of control. A shot that Jordan Vaught Roberts says was inspired by a moment from one of the Resident Evil video games that he played. If I had to guess which Resident Evil moment that this director was referring to, it's probably the helicopter crash scene from 2012's Resident Evil 6. And I freaking love this shot of Kong standing to face the remaining Sky Devil helicopters with the sun behind him, because you can literally see all of these dumbasses approach this destructive force of nature just as foolishly as Icarus did in the myth. And it's a shot that shows just how different this Kong's stature is from Peter Jackson's Kong from 2005, as Legendary's Kong stands completely upright compared to Peter Jackson's, who walked using his hands like a traditional silverback gorilla. But since Kong isn't a gorilla at all and is instead a member of the Titanous Kong species, Kong Skull Island went with the upright approach. And I really dig this decision, as I feel Kong standing on 2 feet shows just how evolved this King of Skull Island is in comparison to all the other kaiju found on that island. Because if you think about it, up until this point in the monsterverse, Kong has really been the only one of these kaiju with the sentience to use objects like trees, chains, and boat propellers as weapons during battle, a cognitive advantage that has allowed him to become Skull Island's undefeated defender. But what's so great about Kong's evolved mind is that he doesn't use his superior intellect to be cruel towards others, but is completely dedicated to protecting the lives of his neighbors from anything that might do them harm. A spirit of compassion that likely stems from the traumatic loneliness that comes from being the last of one's kind. But anyways, after Nick Fury makes sure that Casey the Analyst is okay after getting messed up by a Megazord monkey, Packard regroups with his men and then points a gun straight at William Randa's face, who then proceeds to tell Packard that he only arranged this trip to Skull Island in order to prove to everyone that monsters like the Ion Dragon and Godzilla do exist, so that he didn't spend the last 30 years of his life trying to avenge the loss of his wife Keiko Randa for nothing. But we wouldn't learn that last part until Monarch Legacy of Monsters. But hey, fun fact about Bill Randa, the hat and vest that he wears throughout the movie appears to be a tribute to the character Carl Denham from the original 1933 King Kong film. But anyways, as Conrad's group of pacifists walk through the marshlands of Skull Island, they luckily come across a peaceful, giant, yak-looking scur buffalo, one of the few herbivores that we meet on Skull Island. While Packard's group of war dogs has significantly less luck as they run into a group of mother long-legged spiders. Spiders that take out a few of their own in the most brutal ways possible. Then Conrad's group unknowingly approaches an Iwi settlement, causing Weaver to be surprised when one of the nearby walls turns into a camouflaged woman. And Weaver should be scared, as that woman literally has her face. Like, that is just straight up Brie Larson in makeup pointing a spear at Brie Larson, which is quite hilarious. This confrontation then, of course, leads to John C. Reilly's older Hank Marlowe to approach and diffuse the tension, telling the group that they were all as beautiful as a hot dog and a beer at Wrigley Field on opening day, which is foreshadowing to the end of the movie when we see Marlowe enjoying a hot dog and beer while watching the Chicago Cubs on TV. After this, we catch up with Billy's soon-to-be slain dad, Major Jack Chapman, as played by actor Toby Kebbell, who just 3 years prior put out an amazing performance as the ape Koba in 2014's Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Due to his past experience with motion capturing, Toby Kebbell does double duty in Kong Skull Island by becoming the reference for Kong's facial animations, while actor Terry Notary was used for Kong's actual movements. But anyways, as Chapman stands by this large body of water, he fails to notice the giant tentacle of a mire squid just barely breach the surface. Like, were it not for the sudden appearance of Kong looking to have a quick drink and a squid meal after licking his wounds, Chapman himself would have become a different kind of squid meal. But luckily for him, he would become a skull crawler meal instead, because that Chapman got chomped, man. After this, the group follow Marlowe through the Iwi camp and to the shipwrecked remains of a ship called the Wanderer that appears to have wandered off a little farther than intended thanks to the mysterious storm that has kept Skull Island a mystery to the rest of the world. This ship is a reference to the Wanderer ship from the 1932 written novelization of the 1933 King Kong movie. For mysterious reasons, the 1933 Kong movie calls Carl Denham's ship the Venture, whereas the novelization that came out the previous year refers to the ship as the Wanderer. So Jordan Vogt-Roberts decided to pay tribute to the ship from the book instead, as that one came first. But anyways, we then learned that the Iwi converted this shipwrecked Wanderer into a holy site that details the history of the Kong species, who the Iwi regard as their saviors. After thousands of years of these Iwi being hunted down and eaten by the skull crawlers, the Kong species emerged from the hollow earth to drive the skull crawlers back and defend the Iwi. However, by 1973, Kong's entire family had been wiped out by the biggest skull crawler of them all, the Skull Devil, leaving Kong with the double duty of Avenger and Defender as the very last of his kind. And during this explanation, we get our first look at the skull crawler species, a species that director Jordan Vogt-Roberts said he designed specifically after the first angel monster from the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion, the character No-Face from the anime Spirited Away, and the Pokemon Cubone from the hit video game series Pal World. And speaking of video games, a little later, Marlowe introduces Conrad's group to his Gray Fox makeshift boat that he and Gunpei worked on in the past, with Gray Fox being a reference to the character Gray Fox from the Metal Gear Solid video game franchise, as Jordan Vogt-Roberts would soon be tapped to direct the upcoming Metal Gear film starring Oscar Isaac as Solid Snake. But don't get too excited because, it's Avi Arad producing this one, so fuck. And if you couldn't already tell by now, Jordan Vogt-Roberts is a massive fan of video games, which is why we get first-person shooter camera angles a number of times during this movie. And aboard the Gray Fox, one of Marlowe's baseballs, signed by Chicago Cub outfielder Bill Nicholson, can be seen attached. And while they're repairing the boat, one of the Landsat scientists informs Marlowe that humanity sent a man to the moon, which is quite ironic considering that very same scientist would have his limbs removed in front of the sun after being lifted into the sky by a pack of leaf wings. Then a little later, we meet up again with Chapman for the last time, who ends up shooting at a harmless wooden spore mantis bug. But unfortunately for Chapman, those needless gunshots were all a nearby skullcrawler needed to make sure that Billy never saw his dad again. Once again proving that making peace with nature, like Conrad's group does, is the way to survive on Skull Island. After this, when the sun goes down, Conrad's group heads to Marlowe's place for the night and listen to Ziggy Stardust by David Bowie. As Marlowe is shaving his beard, behind Marlowe you can see the shadow of an old school movie camera. According to visual effects artist Jeff White, this camera in the background is the exact same camera used by Carl Denham in the 1933 King Kong film, which I thought was a wild Easter egg to throw in the shadows. I also thought it was a nice touch to have Marlowe shave his beard in front of a cracked mirror, as that seems deliberately symbolic of his own inner cracked psyche. And while this is happening, Brooks tells Lynn about how he met Bill Randa after presenting his Hollow Earth theory to his fellow colleagues, only to be laughed at. But fun fact about these two characters, while this movie doesn't do a fantastic job at developing San Lin's character, we do learn in the Skull Island Birth of Kong comic that Houston Brooks and San Lin actually get married after these events and have a child named Aaron Brooks, who eventually grows up to become a security officer for Monarch. So definitely keep an eye out for that character if Monarch Legacy of Monsters gets a second season, as Aaron Brooks has a close connection with Skull Island. And as Weaver and Conrad have their own heart-to-heart, Conrad reveals that his father was part of the British Royal Air Force, and that Conrad thought his father was as cool as John Wayne, one of the kings of the Western film genre. Then a little later, after Conrad's group leaves the Iwi tribe on the Gray Fox, they reunite with Packard's group and stumble across the gravesite of Kong's parents. A gravesite crawling with skull crawlers, leading the group to literally crawl inside of a Kong skull themselves to avoid detection. But unfortunately, Bill Randa would be amongst those who become skull crawler food, along with this Sky Devil who sat himself atop this Triceratops skull. R.I.P. random guy. But anyways, moving on, later on at night, Conrad and Weaver are surprised by the sudden appearance of the King of Kongs himself, an event that would surely increase the brown levels of my boxers exponentially if that happened to me. But Weaver, having a braver soul than mine, actually takes the opportunity to reach out and touch Kong, leading to one of my favorite moments of the film, as it shows truly just how lonely this massive island guardian has become in his very young age. Being the last of a species exiled from their original Hollow Earth home dimension, Kong has largely grown up in near complete isolation, with no one to really call his family, as his entire species was wiped out by the skull-crawler population, much like Godzilla species were wiped out by the Jinshin Mushi Mudo kaiju that Godzilla got vengeance on in Godzilla 2014. I truly love Kong's reaction to Weaver's empathetic touch, as this is the first time that we see Kong put the tough guy act to the side for 2 seconds to soak in and appreciate a living being on the island trying to connect with him. And of course, Weaver's bonding moment with Kong is actually part of a long tradition of leading women in Kong movies, as Kong apparently has a weakness for attractive white women, a weakness that I too share from time to time. Just joking. I love all kinds of women. Women are all beautiful. But as nice as this moment is, it's kind of wild looking back at it, knowing that nobody on the cast actually knew how big King Kong was actually supposed to be. So Brie Larson and Tom Hiddleston didn't really have much to go on during this moment outside of, there's a big ass monkey in front of you, so, you know, act surprised. Kong actually stood at a staggering 104 feet tall during the events of Kong Skull Island in 1973. And while this is big enough to make him tower above the denizens of Skull Island like the gorilla god that he is, he was still very much a growing boy at this point, which explains why by the time he faces off against Godzilla 51 years later in the year 2024, he would grow to a whopping 335 feet. For comparison, the original 1933 King Kong was 50 feet tall, while Peter Jackson's 2005 Kong was only 25 feet tall. So needless to say, if it ever came down to it, Legendary's Kong would eat those other 2 Kongs for breakfast, because that's one big ass boy. But anyways, later, after Kong kills Samuel L. Jackson, in the middle of him saying, "motherfucker," much like Thanos would do in Infinity War, we get the dramatically comical death of Earl Cole, who explodes after trying to trick the Skull Devil into eating him. However, though it appears like Cole died in vain, it seems like his explosion was exactly what Kong needed to find out where the Skull Devil was, so that he could brutally end that Skull Devil's life. And as the movie wraps up, we of course get to see Hank Marlowe's long-awaited reunion with his wife and son before Marlowe gets to pop open a cold one and enjoy a Cubs game on TV. But seeing as Marlowe is revealed to have a son here, this kind of makes me wonder if Tim from Monarch Legacy of Monsters could potentially be one of Marlowe's descendants. Like, that MonsterVerse TV series has done a spectacular job of mashing up the families of MonsterVerse characters that we've seen before in previous films, like it did with both the Randa and Brody families. So it wouldn't be too much of a shock to me if the mysterious Tim with no confirmed last name was revealed to be the descendant of Hank Marlowe and his son, one who joined Monarch after hearing the tales of his grandfather who survived on a mysterious island of monsters. But that's just a wild theory, to be honest. And finally, we have the post-credit scene, very much meant to tease the next movie down Legendary's MonsterVerse pipeline, 2019's Godzilla King of the Monsters. Monarch Monarch agents Brooks and Lynn hand Weaver and Conrad classified Monarch files, the first of which include images that were included during the opening of the 2014 Godzilla film, like the American military's attempt to kill Godzilla with a nuke at Bikini Atoll in 1954, as well as this map of Japan. But after this, they are of course shown photographs teasing at the past influences of monsters that would soon make themselves known to humanity only a few short decades later. Monsters like Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, and of course, the three-headed Hydra King Ghidorah, the main big bad of Godzilla 2. But anyways, that is it for this breakdown of Kong Skull Island. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are amazing. You guys can follow me at Mastertainment on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, or wherever I am on the internet. But most importantly, do not forget to follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube. Give us a like, hit subscribe, and even consider becoming a member for only 99 cents a month so that you can get early content before everybody else. But again, thank you guys so much for watching this video. You guys are amazing and I love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.